Let's get into it. Cartel Wives last week was chapter 10, and we got right up to the point where Jay had a plan to make sure that he went and got Peter out of there safely. So that's where we're at now. Cartel Wives, chapter 11.
El Chapo. Mia. It had been a few days since Peter was kidnapped, and I was still a wreck. I couldn't sleep. I'd stay up all night worrying about him. I'd cry in the shower, and I didn't eat at all. I grew up in a religious family, so I got on my knees and prayed for hours a day. I kept thinking I could have been sweeter to him. I could have listened a little better. I remembered all the times I shouldn't have been a brat or selfish. I couldn't believe this was happening to me. To Peter. But Junior said he had a plan, and I believed him.
Olivia. Unfortunately, Junior's plan was to meet with Joaquin Guzman Loera, a.k.a. El Chapo, the head of the Sinaloa Cartel. It sounded like a frickin' suicide mission to me. The only reason Peter could have been kidnapped was because of our debt to Chapo, Junior told me. Peter and I have been repaying it. Pablo knows we're good for the money, and he should be telling Chapo. So you're just going to march up to the world's biggest drug lord and tell him that? I wasn't just skeptical. I was terrified for him. It's the only way to prove that we're on track, that there was no cause for Peter's kidnapping. He was right. Junior loved Peter to death and was willing to do whatever it took to get him back, even if it meant jeopardizing his own life. Peter was worth every risk, and this was the only choice Junior had if he ever wanted to see his brother alive.
Mia. The Sinaloa Cartel is one of the most sophisticated, powerful, and dangerous criminal enterprises in the world. Its main function is procuring narcotics like cocaine, heroin, marijuana, and methamphetamines from their original source, shipping them into Mexico, then smuggling and distributing them into the United States and around the world.
Olivia. At the time, El Chapo was the most wanted man in the world, next to bin Laden. He was worth billions, all of it from his massive trafficking network, which was more sophisticated and extensive than Pablo Escobar's. Chapo wasn't that different from my father-in-law. He'd been born into poverty and had entered the drug trade in his youth when he began growing opium poppies. By the time he was 15, he had his own marijuana plantation, and by his 20s, he'd started trafficking across the U.S. border.
I mean, come on, man. The bud don't fall far from the tree. That man was the same deal. Brought up in the game, knew no other life. If we gotta eat, then this is how it's gonna go down. I mean, the cycle seems to be broken now. Somebody asked the other day, which one of their kids you think they're gonna teach to hustle? And I think that would just undo everything they did, and for the sake of their family, that would just undo everything. So I feel like in that bloodline, it may be true that the curse is over and the cycle is broken. But absolutely was a cycle if you look at the father's life. You know what I'm saying? Jay was right in the sense that, listen, if this guy thinks we owe him some bread, it's better that I'm there to take care of it than to let people have their own idea of what's happening.
But unlike my father-in-law, his special skill was violence, and he used it to increase his power until, in the mid-1980s, he gained control of the Sinaloa Cartel. El Chapo had airplanes, rocket launchers, submarines, and a vast army of dedicated workers at his disposal.
Mia. He was the most powerful man in Mexico, but he remained hidden. The Sinaloa Cartel's base of operations was in Culiacan, a city of just under 1 million, the largest city in the state of Sinaloa. It's hard to run a criminal enterprise in the middle of an urban area, however, so much of Chapo's business was conducted in the Sierra Madre, just to the east of Culiacan. He could hide in the peaks, concealing drugs, prisoners, and millions in cash, and slip into a neighboring state if trouble seemed to be brewing.
Olivia. That's where Junior hoped to meet him, but the question was how to get to him. That April, Junior and Peter were just names on a piece of paper to Chapo. They were American boys who seemed to be doing pretty well for themselves, distributing a lot of his cartel's drugs into the States. He hadn't met them, though. He had suppliers like Pablo do that for him. Not just anyone could meet with Chapo. Being in the business wasn't enough. You had to have a personal connection. Then they'd ask the boss himself. If Chapo liked the idea, you'd fly into the mountains to see him. If he didn't like what he was hearing, you might not make it back. Luckily, Junior's best friend was a guy named Tomas Arevalo, who I'd met a few times through Kay back in the day. Tommy was Kay's connect after Adrian went to prison. He was from Sinaloa, and he knew a lot of major players in the cartels.
So if you guys recall, Tommy was the guy that when the older brother Armando went to prison, Tommy came and approached the twins and said, "What's up? Y'all want this work?" And Jay credits him as his best friend. I believe they were together when Jay saw the news story about Sammy the Bull getting the 5 years.
When I first started dating Junior, I remembered seeing Tommy at a dinner party Junior and P were throwing at Ruth's Chris Steakhouse. "What are you doing here, Tommy?" I said. "I'm working for Junior and Peter now," he said. I remember thinking, if Tommy works for them, they're on another level. Apparently, Tommy had a brother-in-law who knew a lot of the bosses in Culiacan. Junior's plan was to fly to Culiacan with Tommy, meet with the brother-in-law who had connections, and pay his way to meet with Chapo. Letting Junior go was torture, and I've never been more scared. But the decision was made, and we didn't even have to discuss it. We both loved Peter very much, and we knew that if he had to bring Peter back from the dead, he was going to find a way to do it. The day he left, I stood in front of him, and with no idea if I'd ever see him alive again, I tried to reassure him. "You're strong, and I believe in you. Just make sure you come back to me, okay?" He looked at me, kissed me hard on the lips, and said, "I promise." I just let the man of my dreams go, I thought. I just let the father of my unborn baby head out the door to be killed. If something happens to him, I'll never forgive myself.
Super dangerous situation, because if again, I'm going to try to get that Narco Wars video that I did back up. It got copyright struck. But if you watch that video, there's leaked footage of Chapo interrogating a guy that he got tied to a pillar at his crib. You know what I'm saying? Like, it was a very distinct possibility that Jay couldn't have let, he didn't have to leave that island. He left that island because they let him leave that island, you know?
Mia, I was so grateful to Junior, but like Olivia, I just didn't see how this was going to work. Cartel bosses don't do you favors. For all we knew, Junior was going to be tortured and shot in the head right beside Peter, and then Olivia and I would both be alone.
Olivia. When Junior got to Culiacan with Tommy, he started meeting with key players in the cartels immediately. Tommy's brother-in-law knew all of them, and pretty much everybody had some close connection to Chapo. Junior was telling his story to anyone who'd listen, even offering a $500,000 to anyone who could just set up a meeting for him. Unfortunately, things didn't work like that, but he was desperate. He knew Peter was suffering. He could just feel it. One day he was out with Tommy, and a familiar face approached him. "Hey, cuate," that translated to twin. "It's Omar. Remember we met at the bullfight in San Juan? I was with your cousin Tony. I was partying with you and your girlfriend Liv." Junior stopped short. "Yes, of course. I have bad news, though. Someone kidnapped my brother, Uncle Pablo, and Tony. That's why I'm here." Omar didn't even pause. "I can help you." Sure enough, Omar made some calls, and just like that, he set up a meeting with his boss, Alf.
Bruh, just a little bit of relationship building, you know what I'm saying? A little bit of networking go a long way, man. Having a good interaction with somebody, something that didn't come off negative, that didn't leave a bad taste in nobody's mouth, just a cool connection. You run into that person later in life. Same thing with the G Unit spinner chain being returned by the Flores twins, and now here we are all these years later, and 50's executive producing their projects. You know what I'm saying? Like, those little relationships are super important. That right there was probably the difference between him getting Peter back and not getting Peter back. You know what I'm saying?
Alfredo Beltran Leiva, aka Mocomo. This was a big deal. You didn't fuck around with Mocomo because he and his brother Arturo were the heads of the Beltran Leiva organization, and at the time, the BLO was part of the Sinaloa Cartel. Meeting with Mocomo was basically the next best thing to meeting with Chapo himself. The next morning, a guy named Paco picked Junior and Tommy up in a bulletproof SUV and started driving. As they approached the plaza in Culiacan, in broad daylight, probably 100 guys, all holding semi-automatic weapons, stood around the perimeter. They were protecting Mocomo, who was sitting in his pickup. One of the guards searched Junior for weapons, then nodded and let only him through. When Junior walked toward Mocomo, he introduced himself. "It's a pleasure to meet you. My name is Margarito Flores." Junior was intimidated by his army of men. Mocomo was big and serious-looking, even though he was known to be the friendliest capo ever. "What's the reason for this meeting?" he asked. "My brother's been kidnapped, and I'm here trying to get him back." "Well, who do you owe?" Mocomo asked. For the next few minutes, Junior talked big numbers and spoke his language. They discussed a shipment Junior had just received, and soon realized he was in debt to Mocomo because of it. "I don't want you to use my money to pay for your brother," Mocomo said. Junior then made it clear that his money was good, and that he could make payments fast. Mocomo liked what he heard and warmed up to him quickly. "I'm impressed with how fast you move," he said. Then he signaled for his radio and began making calls. After he hung up, he looked Junior in the eyes and lowered his voice. "I know where your brother is. Don't worry. I'll make sure he doesn't die, and from now on, you'll work directly with me."
This sounds like these old dirty motherfuckers always had empty promises and just say whatever. Just say, "You're gonna work for me now. I know where I'm gonna keep him alive." Guess what? To me, from what I know of this story, from what I heard in the podcast and in this, wasn't nobody trying to keep him alive. Wasn't nobody trying to look out for him. Everybody was looking out for themselves. Everybody was trying to get the best deal. If the twins weren't leverageable, then that would have ended different. You know what I'm saying? The twins had leverage because of their network, because of their routes and their logistics. But so everybody over there with this whole "I'll make sure he's okay" is disingenuous. It's bullshit. It's all leverage.
Junior's mouth dropped wide open, and it wasn't because the cartel boss had just handed him the key to expanding his business. Making deals was the last thing on his mind. All he cared about was getting Peter home safely, and Mocomo knew how to do that. But it wasn't just him he was concerned with. "What about my Uncle Pablo and my cousin?" Mocomo looked straight at him, confused. "What are you talking about? I don't have them. Pablo's the one behind this." "Pablo?" Junior stopped for a second and began considering what he'd just heard. Of course Pablo's behind this, he realized.
Dirty ass
He's keeping
deal.
the money for himself and telling Chapo we haven't made good. Now he's kidnapped Peter for the ransom, and that's what he's going to pay Chapo with. He put greed before us, his own family. Mocomo interrupted his thinking and motioned toward two men. "This is Juan and Chapillo Lomas. They'll pick you up tomorrow and take you to see mi papá." In Mexico, everyone knows that Chapo's name is not to be said out loud. He's like the Lord Voldemort of Mexico, but everyone respects and fears him. There was no mistaking it. Mi papá was Chapo and Junior was in. The next
What's Voldemort? Is that Harry Potter? I'm not hip to that. Y'all can crucify me in the chat. I know nothing about no Voldemort.
Next day, a caravan of 40 sicarios in 8 armored SUVs picked up Junior. He'd never seen anything so crazy in his life. He called me from the hangar where they kept all of Chapo's planes, including the one that would take him into the mountains, and told me he was terrified. Growing up, it was every drug dealer's ultimate dream to meet Chapo, and here he was, about to meet the boss himself to plead for his brother's life. "I don't want to lose you," I said. "Please be careful, Junior." "Liv, I have to do this. I'm so sorry. It's the only chance Peter has." He hung up the phone, and I burst into tears.
I bet.
Then Junior boarded a single-engine Cessna and flew deep into the heart of the Sierra Madre Mountains.
Mia. I'd never heard of Chapo when I was growing up. When I watched the news or read anything pertaining to drugs, his name never came up. So it never dawned on me that there was a single person who controlled the flow of drugs. When I moved to Mexico, I'd hear Peter and Junior mention him every now and then, but I didn't really pay attention. He was a ghost. This guy who had a lot of power but may or may not have really existed. So when Olivia said, "Junior's getting on a plane to meet with El Chapo and to convince him to release Peter," all I heard was "release Peter." "He's alive?" I asked. "Yes. Junior's going to call us when he's back from the meeting. He has no idea how long it's going to take." I must have been so out of it that it wasn't even clear what she said.
And it's a false start, because as we know, those of us who did survive in El Chapo, we know it took much longer than this trip. One wife is missing her husband already. The other wife is giving her husband up to go get him. This wife just heard the word release. Probably didn't give her relief, but gave her hope, made her think that, this is going to work right away. False start. Everything takes time.
Liv grabbed my shoulders. "Mia, Junior's not coming back without Peter. I promise you."
Olivia. When Junior boarded the Cessna in Chapo's hangar, he was greeted by the pilot, who couldn't have been more than 17 and was wearing sandals and a t-shirt. Junior looked at Chapillo Lomas and asked, "You sure he knows how to fly this thing?" The pilot answered, "Don't worry. I know every single valley in these mountains. This is what I do all day. The military will never find us." Junior was actually more worried about the kid crashing on takeoff. But when he looked around the plane, he realized he should be more concerned about being taken down. Judging from the 10 radios, dozen grenades, rocket launcher, and a military-grade M50 that were lying in the seat next to him, it must have happened before. So clearly, they were prepared to retaliate.
Jesus.
"Who's going to use these things if we're spotted?" Junior asked Chapillo.
"You, bro."
"We are, of course."
Yeah.
They took off, and probably 20 minutes into the flight, Junior heard a bunch of random numbers being called out on the radios. "There's a Black Hawk headed our way," said Chapillo. "Grab the M50 and point it out the window."
Jesus.
Junior had never shot at anyone before, much less with an M50. "What the hell have I gotten myself into?" he thought. But sure enough, when he heard the kid cut off the Cessna's engine and begin hovering as the whir of a chopper came toward him, he wasn't going to argue. He cracked the window, picked the weapon up, struggled to turn it because there was literally no room, and began praying his plane wouldn't go down that day.
Mia. Thankfully, within seconds, the radio bleeped out a bunch of other numbers, and the baby pilot started the engine back up. Feeling so much adrenaline, he thought he was going to vomit. Junior put the gun down and tightened his seatbelt as the plane began to descend. "Where the fuck is the landing strip?" Junior yelled to the pilot.
Yo, the voice actress that played Viv, she's great, bro.
The kid pointed out the window to a man-made strip that had been dug into the base of a mountain. "Right there!" Then he cut off the engine again. Junior was positive they were going to collide into the mountain. He thought, this is it. It's all over. But sure enough, the plane touched down and rolled up that mountain just a bit, slowing down until it started to roll backward. Finally, it stopped completely. Chapillo opened the door, and Junior jumped out of the plane like it was about to catch fire.
I bet.
When his feet hit the ground, he looked around and saw a crowd of men dressed in military-style garb. They were looking at him like he was from another planet. After all, he was young and American, and they weren't used to seeing his kind up in those mountains.
Olivia. A Hummer edged up to him, driven by yet another guy decked out in army gear. Surrounding it were dozens of armed men on ATVs, all carrying grenades in their military-style jackets. They drove 20 minutes down bumpy trails that you'd be hard-pressed to actually call roads. And as he looked out the window, he noticed the bulldozers and excavators that must have been used to clear the mountains for Chapo's compound. Finally, they arrived at Chapo's palapa. It was open on all sides, with spectacular views of the surrounding mountains. Chapo was wearing a black snapback hat with a military logo. He looked right at Junior and extended his hand. "I'm Joaquin Guzman Loera." "It's an honor to meet you," Junior said. "My name is Margarito Flores." "Mucho gusto," Chapo replied in a powerful voice, meaning, "Nice to meet you." Then he continued, "What do you want?" Chapo's right eye doesn't move very much, so Junior felt like his stare was going right through his body. But he quickly pulled himself together and responded, "I'm here for my brother. You know, people that come up here don't go back. I could kill you and your brother right now and go about my day." Junior responded, "Yes, senor, I'm very aware. But I am here because I only have my word."
Mia. Junior spent the next 10 minutes explaining the deal he'd had with Uncle Pablo. But before going into the specifics, Junior brought up a valid point. Why would Pablo act like he'd been kidnapped too, if Peter and Junior actually owed him money? Then Junior revealed that, yes, he had a $10 million debt to Chapo, but he'd been paying it back to Pablo in steady increments. In fact, he was right on schedule, only a few million shy, and he had the ledgers to prove it. It was a miracle Junior had been smart enough to take his ledgers with him to Sinaloa.
Receipts.
They didn't just save Peter's life, they saved his that day too. The ledgers were these thick, worn books, like big old Bibles. For their entire career, he and Peter had been meticulous about keeping track of every single penny that was collected and every single payment they'd made to a supplier, and they'd marked it all in those books. It didn't matter if Peter was dead tired or coming home from a night of partying. He'd always walk into the kitchen, grab his binders, and sit there with his calculator adding and subtracting millions of dollars. You couldn't alter them. All the numbers were tiny, so there was no room to add anything, and absolutely nothing was scratched out. They were flawless. Their notes and numbers indicated the debt payments they'd made to Pablo, with dates. When you added up the numbers, there was no question they'd made their payments right on time.
Wallin'.
There was no way he couldn't prove to Chapo that Uncle Pablo was totally fabricating the story for his own benefit.
He had all the receipts.
Olivia. "Show them to me," said Chapo. Junior pulled the ledgers out of his backpack, and together they started flipping through the pages. "You're moving a lot of work," Chapo said, and Junior nodded. "Chapillo, please go get my cuentas." He ran to fetch them, then handed them to his boss. The drug lord spent the next few minutes comparing dates, pointing from Junior and Peter's ledgers to the notes he'd taken. He cross-checked numbers, nodded his head when he saw they lined up, and said, "Good. Good," when he got to the bottom of a line item that showed a payment had been received on the correct date. It went on like this for probably 15 minutes until Chapo slammed his notebook shut. "Your numbers are good. You have been making payments. Yes, señor. I'm going to help you, but first, you need to settle things with Pablo. I'll send my people with you. Thank you, señor. After you fix it with Pablo, I want you to come back to see me. Junior extended his hand to Chapo. Absolutely. It was an honor to meet you, and I won't let you down. You have my word. Then Chapo turned his back, and Junior was escorted away by 2 armed guards.
Okay, this is where the story differs, and I don't know if they're going to get into it right now. But at this point of the story, in the Surviving El Chapo, they revealed that Chapo told them, you're going to have to give me proof that Lupe, who they're calling Pablo right now in this book, you're going to have to give me proof that Lupe is lying and that Lupe is setting you guys up. Go get your recorder and go record him. If I recall correctly, that was what happened at this point. They didn't mention it here. I don't remember nothing happening, I don't remember him going to deal with Lupe, then coming back to get, to have the tape recorder conversation and then going back. So I feel like it was left out of here, but we'll see.
Mia. 2 days later, Junior drove up to our house. I'm not sure what I was expecting. Maybe this romantic reunion between him and Olivia, or maybe that he'd walk right in the door with Peter. All I know was that I sure as hell wasn't expecting him to come back with a group of guys I'd never seen before. They're Chapo's people, he said. They're gonna be here a few days, staying in the back. I'll tell you the whole story soon, but right now I've got to take care of them.
Olivia. Chapo's associates were there to help Junior settle things with Pablo, but they'd also come to make sure that everything Junior had said at the palapa was true. In fact, they were going to put it on tape. It wasn't like Chapo was just going to send out his guys to rescue someone he couldn't truly believe in. He wasn't going to just say, "Okay, go get Peter." Junior had to earn that trust. For the next 2 weeks, that's all he did. They were constantly at the house, sitting around or talking to Junior and getting to know him. They couldn't have been more polite if they'd tried, but still, they were just there. Poor Mia was a miserable, worried wreck, and I was so sick I was living on saltines and Gatorade. But we put on our happy faces and made them feel at home. Our chefs cooked for them. Our housekeepers cleaned up after them. Soon, they warmed up to our family so much that they actually wanted to help us. Their hearts were in the right place, and being there stopped feeling like a job for them. Then one day, Junior got the word that it was time to leave with them and go settle things with Pablo. If he was lucky after that, Peter just might be freed.
We going on to episode, chapter 12. We doing a double feature today. Let's get it.
The morning Junior left town with Chapo's workers, Raul and Gordo, I was so tired I could hardly say goodbye. I'd been exhausted for weeks. Every time someone knocked on the door, I thought I was about to get a package with Peter's finger in it.
Jesus.
I kept having nightmares that someone had sent Peter's head to our house. And when I woke up sweating, I'd lie in bed, convinced that he was dead. Olivia was the only person I could really talk to. And sometimes even that didn't feel great because I was so jealous of her. She had a fiancé and a baby on the way, and she was planning her wedding. She had a life ahead of her, and I had shit. She tried her best to reassure me and never talked about herself, but nothing she said could truly help.
Very honest.
Olivia. I practically pushed Junior and Chapo's guys out the door the morning they left to settle things with Uncle Pablo and, hopefully, free Peter. The days were passing and I knew he was suffering. But I'd watched Junior win Chapo's people's trust all week, and I could see the hope on his face. He was determined to get his brother back, even if it was the last thing he did. Mia and I were on pins and needles all day, waiting for him to call. "Do you think something went wrong? Why hasn't he called?" Mia kept saying. "It's fine. We gotta trust Junior." In my mind, though, I was just as scared as she was. Finally, my phone rang late that night, It was Junior. "Baby, what happened?" I asked and put it on speaker so Mia could hear too. "I'm okay. It's going to be okay. But fucking Pablo, I don't even know who that man is anymore." "Just tell us what happened." For the next 10 minutes,
I'll tell you who that man was. He was who he always was. He was who he always was. These snakes in the grass, boy, their disguises are long-lasting disguises, but eventually they'll show you who they are.
Mia and I didn't say a thing while he talked.
Mia. Junior had arrived at Pablo's house a few hours after he left home. He wasn't alone. He had 4 men with him, 2 of his own workers named Raul and Gordo, and Chapo and Mocomo's men, Juan and Paco. No one was armed. After all, they were convinced it wasn't going to turn violent. Junior knocked on Pablo's door, and when it opened, he was escorted in by someone from the state police, who apparently was protecting Pablo. When he stepped aside, there was Pablo, his hand extended toward Junior like nothing had happened. When Junior refused to shake it, the police officer put a gun to his head. "Motherfucker, I will have you killed if you disrespect me in my house," Pablo said as the police officer pushed Junior down to a seated position in a chair, jamming the gun into the back of his head. Juan stepped in. "We have orders from Senor."
None of that.
"I've been going up to those mountain tops for 30 years, Pablo answered. "You think I'm gonna let you come and fuck it up?" Then Pablo grabbed his classic 1911 Special 45, which he always carried, and pistol-whipped Junior.
Nice
Junior
thing.
was not going to sit there and just take it, even if the truth was going to cost him his life. He only had his word, and he wasn't going to let some greedy, deranged man take that from him. The more Junior spoke, though, the more livid Pablo became. He realized he was looking like a liar. But what he didn't know was that Chapo's people were getting it all on tape.
Olivia. Things suddenly shifted. One of the police officers who'd been protecting Pablo changed his mind and said, "Stop hitting him. Let him go." Pablo was stunned. "What the hell do you mean? You're on his side now?" "Yes. We have orders from Señor." Orders are orders, and if they're broken, they could cost you your life. But Pablo didn't care. Instead of dropping the gun, he just kept hitting Junior until Tony started yelling, "Pa, por favor!" But his dad gave him a look of death, and Tony backed down. "I want my money, Junior! Give me the money!" Pablo was out of his fucking mind, and Junior was sure he was going to pop him and his brother in the head just for making him look like a fool. Junior turned to Tony and pleaded with him. "Tony, you know we've been making payments. Why are you doing this? How could you let your dad hurt us like this? We loved you all like family." Tony paused. He knew his dad had to be stopped, so he said, firmly, "Cálmate, pa." Apparently, hearing that pissed off Pablo so much that he didn't just refuse to stop. He backhanded Junior across the face one last time.
Crazy.
He couldn't believe his own son was siding with Junior. Finally, Chapo's men intervened. "Pablo, we have orders from Señor for you to end this. You will not kill los cuates. Señor will be contacting you once we get back to Culiacán." Reluctantly, Pablo dropped the gun and nodded his head. He'd just agreed to negotiate Peter's release. Then, as Junior proceeded to walk out of the house, the state police stopped him. "Please tell Señor that this was all a misunderstanding," he said as he handed him his card. "I believe you, and I'm here a su servicio."
Boy, just a bunch of tail between the leg. You know, daddy called and said, "Hey, step down." He had to tell his other daddy, "Sorry, I can't, we got orders. We got to follow orders."
At your service.
Bootlick.
Mia. Junior came back to Guadalajara right away, bruised but alive. But Peter didn't. His release was still going to take some time. Chapo's people still had to get the word back to him, then Señor had to call Pablo. I'm sure Pablo was scared for his life knowing he was caught in a lie and behind a kidnapping that never should have happened. His plan had backfired, and he never thought in a million years that Chapo would find out. I was so relieved to see Junior. I'd been worried sick Pablo was going to kill him, and Junior had a baby on the way and loved Olivia so much. But still, I couldn't take the agony of Peter being gone anymore. I missed him so much my heart hurt.
Olivia. Junior headed back to the mountaintop with Juan in Chapillo Lomas. When he got there, Chapo was furious with Pablo. I just lost my brother, so I can imagine how you must be feeling, Chapo said. I still want my 10 million fully repaid, but remember, you can make up the money later, but you can never replace your brother.
That's crazy to me. I remember feeling in the Surviving El Chapo series like it was disingenuous and diabolical for Chapo to be like, I lost my brother recently, bro. You don't want to lose yours. You know, like, bro, you the one in control of this. You know what I'm saying? I just gave you proof the other dude owes you 10 mil. And now you holding your sympathy for your brother over my head with my brother. You know what I mean? Like, it was just, it's just a testament to how diabolical these dudes are. Also, different from Surviving El Chapo podcast, again, this book was written in 2016 or 2017. I know it was published in 2017. They did not mention that Chapo gave Jay the idea for the recording. They just said that Chapo's men were recording. Now, I don't know if that's something that was maybe made up for the Surviving El Chapo podcast or something that had to be held back from this because, you know, the husbands were still in prison. I don't know. Again, there's many different reasons why stories change from the book to the podcast. Some would get more information, some would get less. But in here, they just grazed right past the fact that there was a recorder and that Chapo told him, get a recorder, go get proof that Lupe is doing this and bring it back to me. Well, he has his proof now, but again, he's still charging them the $10 million. It seemed like all of that was for nothing. But not, because now they are in direct communication with the man.
Then Chapo relaxed. When your debt is settled, I want you and your brother to come back and see me. We need people like you. Yes, señor, Junior responded. Chapo waved for German Olivares, his chief executive and right-hand man, to make arrangements for the payment with Junior. Then he was dismissed.
Mia. Peter's second kidnapping had begun much as the first had, with crooked cops. When Peter went to his Uncle Pablo's house to settle things up with him, the first thing he did was walk up to his cousin Tony and hug him. "Where's Uncle Pablo?" he asked, and Tony made an excuse. Minutes later, he heard a bang at the back door, and 15 to 20 men in full SWAT gear and ski masks barged in, shouting, "Policía Federal!" Upon entering, one of the policemen hit Peter in the mouth and stomach with a rifle, then beat him in the back till he fell to the floor. He could hear them struggling with Tony, too, and it sounded just as bad as what was happening to him. Then the cop pulled him to his knees, shoved his face into the sofa to suffocate him, and screamed, "You're fucking going back to the United States, you piece of shit!" Worrying about Pablo, wherever he might be, Peter yelled at the police, "Leave the old man alone!" Next, the officer stripped Peter to his underwear, blindfolded him, wrapped his head with masking tape, and dragged him out the door to a police vehicle, where he threw him in the back. They drove him through the mountains to a remote town midway between San Juan and Guadalajara. He sat outside, freezing cold, till the morning. The kidnappers returned and woke him up with a gun to his head. "Get the fuck up," they screamed.
Consistent.
Peter wasn't thinking about himself. "Is the old man okay?" he asked. But they wouldn't give him a straight answer. They dragged Peter to a pickup truck and laid him in it, flat. One kidnapper pressed his boots into Peter's ribs, which was excruciating after all the beatings he'd endured. Then they drove to a shack where they taped his feet and threw him down on the cold floor.
They had a whole theatrical production of Lupe getting arrested too, and the primo, and yeah, all this. And then the moment they put the hood on Peter and covered him up with the tape, that was the end of their performance. It's a dirty game.
Olivia. Each morning, Peter's kidnappers woke him up by putting a gun to his head and cocking it.
Jeez.
They asked the same question every day. Who do you work for? He never answered, so they'd hit him across the face and say, You think you're slick? I've heard you sell tons of work in the United States, and you have all these fancy horses. Tell me who the fuck you work for. Do you work with El Chapo and El Mayo? No, Peter answered. His captors laughed. Listen, before the day's over, I'm going to make you tell me who you fucking work for. Peter didn't eat anything for several days and became disoriented from dehydration. He was forced to use a bucket as a toilet while a gun was pointed at him. He began to look so bad that the kidnappers called someone on their radio and asked, Should I kill him now? He's dying already.
Mia. Peter was so weak, he didn't even ask the kidnappers to spare his life. The only strength that kept him going was the thought of me. If they don't kill me, if I make it through this, Peter told himself, I'll marry Mia. 4 weeks into his kidnapping, it was Mexican Mother's Day, May 10th. Peter could hear church bells ringing, calling all mothers to the service.
4 weeks, bro. 4 weeks, barely eating, emaciated. Ain't nobody taking care of you. They letting you dehydrate. They beating you. They, threatening you with the hammer every morning. You gotta do what you gotta do in a bucket. It's just a lot. 4 weeks.
And he thought about what his poor, sweet mom must be going through. Tied up and abandoned in a dark room for hours on end, he'd almost given up hope. Not just because of how vicious his treatment had been, but also because he knew people don't usually come out alive from kidnappings in Mexico. While he sat and prayed for his life, he also worried about his Uncle Pablo and Cousin Tony, who he assumed were in captivity just like him. For weeks, no one had told him otherwise. He hoped they'd been freed, but for all he knew, they were living some nightmare somewhere, too.
Snakes in the grass.
More significant than that, though, was the fact that he had no clue that his brother was already deep in negotiations to free him.
Olivia. A few days after Junior made his debt payment, Olivares contacted him. Pablo's not answering our calls, Chapo's right-hand man said. But not to worry, we'll fix it. Hearing this was reassuring, but it wasn't enough. Junior still hadn't gotten word about Peter's location, and he was so worried he wasn't sleeping. Then, he got a call from an unknown number. Hello? He said. Oh my God, Peter! Where are you? Junior yelled at me and Mia to run into the room. When we got there, he put the phone on speaker. I'm in the Sierra, but I don't know where. I'm going to try to find a road. Peter's voice was cracking. I don't know how long my signal's going to last, but I just need to talk.
Okay, so they let him out onto the street. Now, they skipped a whole lot in this book. That's why I think the two things complement each other, the book and the podcast, you know what I'm saying? Because the things that they overlooked in that book, they got into detail here. The things that they overlooked here, they got in the podcast, you know what I'm saying? So there was a whole lot more to this. So they were paying back the $10 million. They were appraising their jewelry. They were doing whatever they can do to get the money. It got to a point where they realized, Chapo, Lupe, Leyva, they all realized this guy's going to die on us. We got to get this guy out of here. That's the reason I think they let him go. They let him go. They said, we're going to let your brother go. They let him go in the dark. And he's, again, emaciated and his body is hurting. And he's in the pitch darkness. And they talk about how he had to go down the hill thinking he was going to find service. There was no service. He had to take his weak self back up the hill and try to find service. And when his brother finally found him in the dark. They found each other. He peeped him with the flashing lights coming down the mountain. So again, that all of that was way overlooked, and now they just it sounds like they just let him out, and he made his phone call.
Baby, I love you, said Mia. I love you too. I can't wait to see you. It's the thought of you that kept me alive. Oh, God, poor Peter, I thought as tears of joy flowed down my cheeks. Then I looked at Junior and realized he's been selfless. I'll admire him forever for doing the unbelievable, for saving Peter's life.
That's his other half.
They drove me into the mountains for probably an hour, Peter said. He's in the middle of fucking nowhere, I thought. They dragged me out of the car, kicked me in the back of my legs, and let me fall to my knees. I was expecting a bullet in my head, but a man leaned down and put something in my shoe. It was the key to my handcuffs. Then he grabbed my hand and put a piece of paper in it. Junior, it was your number. He put a phone in my pocket, then told me to count to 100 and not move or else he'd kill me. Then he just walked away. I'm coming to get you, said Junior. Wait, did they release Uncle Pablo and Tony? He asked. Junior knew how fragile Peter was, and he didn't want to upset him. They're fine, but it's a long story. I'll tell you everything when you're home. Then he snapped the phone shut.
Mia. Junior knew Peter had to be north, in the mountains outside of Guadalajara, so he ran out the door with Gordo and got in his car. It was late, and they had to save Peter before the sun came up.
Junior drove over 2 hours north through the darkness. There was only one road from Guadalajara to San Juan, so he knew that if he kept driving and calling his brother, he'd find him. He was terrified the whole time that Peter's cell phone was going to die. But when he had service, he'd ring him up. I'm getting close, Peter, he'd say. Just hang on.
Mia. Peter was in the middle of the Sierra, which was full of mountain lions and poisonous snakes that he knew might attack him at any moment. It was so dark most of the time he couldn't make out his hand in front of him, and when he could see, everything was blurry because he'd had a blindfold on for weeks. He was too weak to walk, so he began crawling toward the road, using the flashlight on his phone to guide him. He didn't have much of a voice, but when his brother would call, he'd always answer. I'm here. I'm okay. But I can't see, so I don't know where I am.
Olivia. The road through the mountains was windy, but Junior knew it so well that he didn't slow down. It was pitch black, and he realized that if he flashed his brights, Peter would see them from miles away, know it was him, and call him. I see you, Peter said. You're getting closer.
That's crazy.
But I don't know how far you are, said Junior. Do you have a light? Yeah, but it's not great. Do you hear those coyotes? I do. Drive toward them. Sure enough, Peter was right near some coyotes, and as he held his phone out, Junior could hear them barking and howling through the phone. He drove toward them, listening to their wails grow louder and louder. Finally, Junior saw Pete's little flashlight up ahead in the distance. He got closer and stopped in the middle of the road. He couldn't pull over because he was on the edge of a cliff. Junior opened the door, and Peter crawled into the car, so skinny that he looked like a little old man. He burst into tears and grabbed Junior's head because he had to see his brother's face. Peter was in disbelief. He was convinced he was about to die. Nothing is more important to me than you, Peter said.
I'm convinced he was about to die. You know what I'm saying? That wasn't let's take care of the prisoner. You know what I'm saying? Let's take care of our hostage situation. No, not at all. They had zero regard for the man.
I'm just so happy to see you, Junior said as he hugged him. I can't believe they let me go, Junior. I thought they were going to kill me. You're safe now, his brother reassured him, but it wasn't enough. Peter was dying to know something else. Where's Mia? He asked. She's at home waiting for you, Junior answered, and that's where we're going right now.
Mia. The sun had just come up when Peter and Junior walked into the house. I saw Peter from the top of the stairs, but I had to look twice to realize it was him. He looked like a 10-year-old boy. After I ran down and pulled him close to me, I felt him start to heave. He was frail, his eyes were sunken, and he was so cold it was almost like he died. We stood together like that for probably 10 minutes.
He was knocking on the door, man. He was knocking on the door.
And I knew he was never going to be the same again. I led him back up the stairs and we walked into the bathroom. I tried turning on the light, but he stopped me. "Don't, please. It hurts my eyes," he said. When we took off our clothes and got in the shower together, a smell like sweat, garbage, and death overcame me. Then I began to wash him gently so I wouldn't hurt his wounds. "You're home," I said, "and I'm going to make sure you never leave again." When we finally got out of the shower, Peter started talking. "The whole time I was gone, I prayed. I asked God to protect my brother for the rest of his life, and I prayed for Olivia, that she would stay strong and love Junior forever. I thanked God for causing her to be so good to him, and I apologized for always giving her a hard time. I prayed that my daughter would live a long, healthy, and happy life and find someone great to love her as much as I do. And I asked God for your forgiveness." "For what?" "For leaving you like I did." "Don't be silly." "And I promised God that if he brought me home, I'd marry you and be a devoted husband and father. Mia, you saved my life again."
Pues ya era tiempo.
We didn't exactly get engaged then, but it was coming. Something fundamental had changed in Peter, something that was rooting him to me and to life in Mexico, and I felt deep in my bones that life was about to get a lot more complex. I was ready for it. Sure, I was terrified that the man I loved had stared death in the face, but I was prepared for life with a man who I loved without question, despite the job he did every day. But was I ready to risk my life for that world? Were any of us? It was a dilemma we'd be forced to figure out sooner rather than later.
There it is. Wow. Listen, man, you'd have to do a lot of hard work to make the scripted series of this story bad. Because as we hear these stories, me being from where I'm from, being a writer myself, being an actor myself, I could see these scenes happening, what they look like, the tension build up to them. It's all natural. Nobody needs to, it's already stranger than fiction. So I'm hoping they don't ruin this, because there's a lot of compelling parts to this story, and that's one. You know what I'm saying? I can see the man, her looking down, coming through the door, all of that stuff. If you take the Surviving El Chapo and you take this episode and you put these two parts of it together, there's a lot of information there, man. A lot of details. This story should be no lesser than what a Breaking Bad was, or The Wire, or those shows that stand up at the top. There's no reason that this shouldn't be that. Like I said, you'd have to do a lot of work to mess this up.